Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the launch of this webinar series, Shutting Down Incinerators and Building Zero Waste Futures. Today, we will start with the first webinar of this series, Organizing for Grassroots Power. My name is Maria Guillang, she, her pronouns, and I am the Communications Coordinator for the US and Canada at GAIA, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's session, Organizing for Grassroots Power, is the first in a three-part series brought to you by GAIA's Failing Incinerators Project Cohort. The Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, also known as GAIA, is a global network of over 800 grassroots and national organizations from 92 countries around the world, working together at the intersection of waste and environmental justice. The Failing Incinerators Project Cohort is a core group of partners fighting to shut down incinerators in environmental justice communities to set forth healthier alternatives towards zero waste systems that support and empower their communities. Before we begin, just a quick housekeeping note, Krystle, they, them pronouns with GAIA will be managing our tech support and moderating the chat. We have enabled the Q&A function and encourage folks to add your questions on there in the chat as we will hold space for Q&A at the end. We're here today because of the powerful organizing led by communities impacted by waste incineration, communities that have fought tirelessly to shut down toxic facilities and push for zero waste. Through the Failing Incinerators Project, grassroots activists have worked to expose the harms of incineration and demand healthier and more just alternatives. In the US, 80% of incinerators are located in predominantly low-income, non-English speaking communities of color, exposing residents to dangerous air pollution linked to asthma, cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and reproductive health complications. EJ communities have recognized the importance of moving away from this toxic practice and implementing waste management systems that don't require people to sacrifice their health, dignity, and well-being. EJ communities have taken the lead in creating the space for people to get involved, organized, and educated about the issues that affect them, while also providing policy tools for communities to advocate for themselves and for the change that they want to see. The FIP cohort has not only shut down failing incinerators, but has also strengthened other anti-incineration campaigns across the country, advancing the broader movement for zero waste and climate justice. So far, 3 of the 6 incinerators in the Failing Incinerators Project have shut down in Michigan, California, and Oregon. These victories didn't just happen by chance. They're a result of tireless organizing, collaboration, and a refusal to accept toxic waste systems as the norm. The Failing Incinerators Project wouldn't have been possible without the generous support from the Freedom Together Foundation. We also received additional support from the Plastic Solutions Fund and the B Fund. This project and cohort have also played a crucial role in supporting other anti-incineration campaigns across the country, strengthening the broader movement for zero waste and climate justice. As GAIA celebrates its 25th anniversary this year, we've been proud to stand alongside grassroots organizers, helping to build skills, provide technical support, amplify organizing, and connect local fights to national and global movements. And at a time when climate justice is under direct threat, this kind of collective action matters more than ever. GAIA's network continues to bring together advocates, researchers, and frontline communities to take on incineration and push for real solutions. The wins we've seen over the years prove one thing: when communities organize, they win. And that's exactly why today's conversation is so important. So without further ado, let's hear from our awesome speakers who are also part of the Failing Incinerators Project cohort. And first up, we have Chloe Desir. Chloe Desir, she, her pronouns, is the EJ policy analyst for Ironbound Community Corporation. She organizes residents to identify problems that affect them and pressures policymakers and corporations to address and prioritize those issues focused on fighting against toxic gas polluting power plants and incinerators at the grassroots level. She has a passion for making an innovative impact in environmental regulations and policy to create change. Chloe currently serves on the New Jersey Environmental Justice Advisory Council. So I will turn it over to Chloe and share the presentation.
Thanks, Maria. Much appreciated. A good afternoon, everyone, if that's your time zone that you're in right now. Just gonna wait for the slides to come up, but glad to be a part of this wonderful panel with awesome partners and panels in this panel. But I just want to introduce myself as well as in saying that I was born in an environmental justice community, raised in one, and still live in one today. And I'm really glad that I was able to come into this work and be able to elaborate more on and advocate for the communities that I live in and that my families do, as well as people that are in the community that need to deal with these types of issues that come with being in frontline communities. But yes, so we can change the slide here. So I work with Ironbound Community Corporation, and with that, we have been working alongside Gaia for a long time and trying to find alternatives to dirty energy. But to give you guys a bit of background on the city of Newark, before colonization and before the ravaging of people, this was initially Lenni Lenape land, also marshland, which also speaks to how we deal with the impacts of climate change and having heavy flooding, because in Newark, it only takes about 10 minutes. And in the Ironbound, it takes about 10 minutes to get flooding from rainwater. That's an issue that if we had more marsh, that would probably not be a thing. But now, after going through the displacement of the Lenni Lenape and going into an industrial era, that led to a lot of migration as well as white flight in the city of Newark to now being a community of folks that were predominantly foreign born and English isn't their first language, as well as a lot of industrial facilities that have come into the Ironbound as well. You can see in this right side picture, public enemy number one, Covanta, that has now been renamed Reworld, and doing one of the many crimes, such as emitting purple plume into the air that was noticed, and it was brought onto a bunch of news cycles, to which the only thing that they were able to say after days of questioning was, oh, someone must have accidentally dumped some iodine into our waste stream. So one of the things that we have to make sure we're doing is being very diligent when we hold these facilities accountable, because they'll end up doing things like this, emitting purple plume into the air. And just to give y'all a little bit of background on Covanta as well, in our city, it is the largest garbage incinerator in the state in Newark. And it is in one in three environmental justice communities. They also have an incinerator in Camden as well as in Rahway. And we are constantly going head to head with them as far as trying to make sure that they're being held accountable. And we've even found that incinerators contracts have been shown to pay much less in taxes to the city than they're supposed to be by the millions. So we are making sure that we are holding them accountable in every aspect of the word. But definitely going to go a little bit more into that in the next slide. Going back a little bit. Yes, cool. So, a little bit of statistics here with the Ironbound. 1 in 4 children here have asthma, and the rates are getting higher now. So it can even be soon enough be updated to 1 in 3 children having asthma. And like I mentioned, we have the largest garbage incinerator in New Jersey. And not only are we taking garbage from New Jersey, but a large percentage of the garbage that we're taking in is actually from New York. So we're getting a lot of influx of waste from different areas. In the Ironbound, we also have 3 fossil fuel power plants with the proposal of a fourth one that I'll also be talking about a little later. But we also carry 3 fossil fuel power plants, the largest wastewater and treatment plant in the region, where everyone flushes their toilets. It goes directly into the Ironbound. And then we also have to deal with terrible smells being emitted into the area, not only because of the wastewater treatment plant, but also because um a meat processing facility that melts and burns animal carcasses to turn into creams and lotions is in the same area as all of these other industrial facilities that we have. So it's all along across the street called Doremus Avenue, also known as Chemical Corridor. And these are one of the reasons why we are considered to be an overburdened community. Not to mention, and if you go on to the next slide too, We also are in the midst of a port. Not only do we have a heavy industrial area, but we also have an airport right next to us. And with that airport, the Ironbound experience is seeing over probably lots of planes, but every minute and a half, you're going to hear a plane passing by the community. So we're talking about smells as a source of pollution, as well as noise pollution, something that you become immune to after a while. You don't even notice it, but folks that are passing by will be like, wow, like every minute and a half there really is a plane coming overhead. And not to mention, we also have the third largest seaport in the eastern seaboard. So it's an amalgamation of different things. But 85% of containers move by truck at the port to warehouses in the region. So we're dealing with an immense amount of truck traffic, thousands of trucks illegally passing through residential areas, adding to the pollution of air quality. And because of that, we were able to have a broad coalition called the Coalition for Healthy Ports that helps us in navigating how we can organize when it comes to environmental issues alongside the port. A lot of things are going through the area from it coming from being a heavy revenue of a port. But all of these things are going through Newark, not necessarily into Newark. So making sure that we're investing in the community that's providing so much and dealing with the ramifications of being that through area is something to always consider when we're thinking about environmental justice as well. Going on to the next slide. So looking at the legislative ways that we've been able to take action is through the New Jersey's environmental justice law. And with this law, when we're considering all of the things that I just mentioned, right? Having the largest garbage incinerator, being in the midst of a wastewater facility, a carcass processing facility, being by the port, as well as the airport as well. This environmental justice law was put together over 10 years ago by partner organizations and community advocates to ensure that before any potential facilities coming into the area of the frontline community, they have to go through an environmental justice analysis to ensure that they wouldn't add further detriment to that community. And the DEP would have to go through that analysis and make that determination as to whether or not that facility can even set foot into that area, if it does or doesn't add more degradation to that area. So we are able to advocate for that. And luckily, we finally got it put into law. And it's been in effect for the past year or so. So to hopefully see some better actions from the DEP in the future with the environmental justice law. So with that, I also have a call to action because the Passaic Valley Sewage Commission is proposing for a fourth fossil fuel power plant in our community, despite already having three. And to give y'all some background on that, the Passaic Valley Sewage Commission actually ran out of power during Hurricane Sandy several years ago. And FEMA gave them millions of dollars to figure out a solution to prevent something like that from happening again, because in that power outage, they ended up having to dump tons of sewage into the Newark Bay. And like I mentioned, if it rains for a couple of minutes in the Ironbound, you're already dealing with flooding. So imagine a superstorm like Hurricane Sandy. We were dealing with sewage mixed in with that flooding, and it was a catastrophe to say the least. So since then, they have been able to take advantage of PSE&G's Energy Strong program. And that Energy Strong program was able to help them strengthen their grid to prevent another power outage from happening. But they were also able to put up flood walls. And instead of coming up with better solutions that we've also offered them and to consider, such as battery storage, offshore wind, solar panels, they decided that a backup power plant makes the most sense to add into the community. So obviously, with those alternatives that we just suggested, why would another power plant even make sense to do? So since I've started working as an organizer, it's been over 4 years now, in which we are asking folks to reach out to the Board of Commissioners who still have to vote on whether or not they can construct this fourth power plant and ask them to say no to it. So if you look at this link here, it's right here, bit.ly/no more PVSC, and it will send you over to a sign-on letter that you can directly send a letter to the Board of Commissioners already pre-written. All you have to do is put in your information, and you will be able to send a letter to the Board of Commissioners asking them to vote no. We have been in crazy times, clearly, but also even on a local level, dealing with the ramifications of administrative orders and actions. And the DEP needs to hear and also see from us as community members, as well as the Board of Commissioners, that this is something that we're opposed to. We've already had over 900 folks sign and send over these letters. So it would be great to have y'all come out as well. So one thing that I also recommend for a lot of people to do is know who your local elected officials are and appointed officials. I wanted to make sure I added there too, because the Board of Commissioners for the Passaic Valley Sewage Commission are people that are locally elected, local councilmen, local mayors. And these are the people that are making decisions to whether or not we're going to be having better air quality or worse. And so making sure that you know who those elected officials are to come out and make sure they're being held accountable for these decisions that they're making is essential and more than important for us in our day-to-day lives. But thank you. Let me know if y'all have any questions, but that's all for me.
Thank you, Chloe, so much. It was great to hear from you. And so now we'll hear from Oriana Holmes-Price. Oriana, she, her pronouns, serves as the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance Director of Organizing, Prioritizing, Community Engagement, Public Education, and statewide and national coalition management pertinent to waste justice, energy, and ports campaigns. She is passionate about organizing residents and finding community-driven solutions to community identified issues. I will share the presentation. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Maria. It's nice to see everyone. Well, see them somewhere on here. Thanks for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. And thank you too for Chloe kind of laying such a great foundation to environmental justice in New Jersey and what that looks like, especially in Newark, where the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance is based, and where a lot of our work stems from as well. I'm going to go to the next slide. So just a little bit about NJEJA. We're a 20+ year organization really focused on supporting communities across New Jersey, especially our BIPOC communities, our low-income communities that are facing environmental injustices, whether it's from transportation expansion, waste infrastructure, which is a huge problem in New Jersey, as Chloe mentioned and highlighted in her slides. Really anything that we can do to support community, we are that arm for them, whether it's doing trainings, education campaigns. What I'll talk about in the slides in a few is about the community listening sessions that we're having and a couple other facilitation styles that we use and can be used, especially with engaging folks around issues like waste justice and waste infrastructure, which isn't always the most fun to talk about. It's not something that a lot of people think about, but especially in New Jersey and many other states, it is a huge problem, especially for our frontline communities where we know the racist, just the targeted siting of these facilities. And so making sure that folks in frontline communities know how to organize against this. Next slide. So this is just a quick map of New Jersey's overburdened communities and where they are in the state. So the blue kind of shaded areas of this map are all of our overburdened communities as defined by these 3 criteria points. On the left, there's plenty of communities in New Jersey that might not meet all of the criteria, but are still overburdened in some way if there's different facilities in the area. Or if they, have one of these but might not meet everything. Next slide, please. And this is just an overlay of New Jersey's overburning communities and then also where our waste facilities are. You see up in North Jersey, there's a lot of activity going on, which again, Chloe mentioned in her slides with the port, bringing in a lot of different things. We have the incinerators in Newark, Rahway, Camden. There's lots of scrap metal facilities. We have tons of landfills. Most of them are county operated. We also have waste transfer stations, recycling stations, lots going on in the state. So really want to make sure that folks in communities, especially our frontline communities, are aware of where these facilities are. Sometimes it might not be directly in their community, but it could be fence line. And so they need to at least know what's in the vicinity in case there's smells, water contamination, things like that. We have the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's EJ mapping tool, so folks can understand where these facilities are located, and then also the stressors that come along with them. Next slide, please. So one thing that we've been doing recently is having these community listening sessions. We've had one in Camden focused on the Covanta, now Reworld incinerator, Whitesboro, where we talk with folks who are looking to actually become incorporated as a borough. And so thinking about waste infrastructure, what that looks like, how to make sure that it can be developed in the most sustainable way possible. We've had sessions in Salem and Cumberland counties as a joint session around a landfill reopening project. We also had a session in Newark around the incinerator there, and also the Passaic Valley Sewage Commission, the fourth plant that Chloe had talked about. And then we're planning some upcoming sessions, hopefully in Lawnside, Asbury Park, and Passaic County this year, to engage residents around different waste infrastructure, waste justice related issues, figuring out exactly what that could look like right now. So we're in the relationship building phase, really identifying the needs, and then the information that folks would like to receive. But the goal from these sessions is to make sure that residents really understand how to navigate the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's website, the different tools that are out there, how they can engage with our Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, and the different subcommittees for that on air, land, and water. And then we also want to just make sure that folks know about waste infrastructure, all the many variations of it that we just talked about on the previous slides, and then whatever the impacts are from said facilities in these communities. And then we want to be able to foster local collaboration. So understanding the ways that we can open up the floor for residents to really share their experiences, their thoughts, and then also their visions for how they want to see their communities move forward. And then how NJEJA can just be a supporting arm to helping all of that work move forward. So that's what we're in the midst of doing right now. And then the pictures on the side are from our most recent sessions in Salem and Cumberland County and Whitesboro. Next slide, please. And so just a couple of the best practices that we've picked up on from these last few sessions. Definitely want to make sure that we are able to build a good relationship prior to hosting a session, just so that we can make sure that this is even the right format to be engaging folks and that they feel comfortable sharing their thoughts, their experiences with us. Also want to be very mindful of personal experiences coming into these community listening sessions. For some folks, it can be traumatic to recount a lot of their experience. So also want to just make sure that we are really sensitive to that. Also, another reason why it's important to co-host these sessions with trusted community partners so that we can really understand the needs of folks on the ground and how we can be responsive to that. Canvassing is also really helpful. Going out with community partners about like 1 to 2 weeks before the session, just personally talking with folks, understanding, why or why not they might be inclined to attend, and how to, just again, build that local relationship with people. A lot of times they just don't even understand what waste infrastructure technically looks like. And so wanting them to know that just talking about their experiences, whether it's, smelling something that's funky in the air. In Camden, it might be seeing soot come out of the incinerator. Kind of looks like snow at times. So, just making sure that people understand they don't have to be an expert to come to these sessions, but really just want them to share their experiences as much as they're comfortable. Also great for accounting for, childcare, transportation, food, interpretation, translation services, all of that, which I think anyone who's been, in the community organizing space, we all know that those are most important, because if people can't meet, their basic needs, how can they show up? So supporting them as much as possible, having some time set aside at the beginning for food and just connecting with one another. Again, just thinking about that relationship building. So it's not super transactional, having folks just come out, but really want to get to know them as people, providing info sheets, any, direct resources that people need, clear follow-up, clear next steps, leaving lots of time for people to really just freely speak, redirect to topics as needed, but really want to make sure that we can have those touch points where we can stay engaged. So it's not just, having the community listening sessions and then they never hear from us again, but want to use these as a launch pad for the next steps so that we can continue working together. And this slide is just on some collaborative visioning styles. If, community listening session doesn't work for a certain community, some other options that folks can use, that I think is really helpful, especially when we're talking about waste. Like I said, it's not something that a lot of people want to talk about or, feel comfortable talking about or have everything. So these are some good styles for kind of opening up the floor, making it a little bit more open for folks to want to share. I think open source technology or methodology is a great method facilitation style that folks could use. It's really about like shared ownership. So kind of turning the mic over to everyone in the room. World Cafe Live is awesome for, that more structured, like medium to large conversation. Appreciative inquiry is one of my favorites, and it really helps folks think about their big vision for their community. So really pushing the boundaries of our minds to understand how we might want to tackle a particular issue. Small group, which I think most people are familiar with. Small groups of people coming together, kind of talking through different issues and thinking about how to move forward. Photo elicitation is really good for more like one-on-one interview style almost, with different residents, understanding through photos how their experience have been in their communities with particular issues. Photo voice is also great for larger style kind of interviews almost, but where the participants are actually documenting their lived experiences through photos or videography, and being able to share that with people. And then Charrette's design thinking really for like iterative processes and community mapping and asset mapping for more like strengths-based visioning, which I think is really helpful for shifting our minds from like deficit lens to, how we can turn things into a positive and work together. So yeah, those are all the styles. And then the last slide is just how to stay connected with us if you want more information.
Thank you so much, Oriana, for your presentation. Up next is Krystle de Alencar. Krystle de Alencar, they them pronouns, is the environmental justice organizer for the Minnesota Environmental Justice Table. Krystle is an organizer focusing on campaigns that center on community-led solutions to environmental justice issues. They specialize in base building, supporting frontline community leadership, political education, and campaign strategies. They also work in coalition building, legislative advocacy, and research that supports EJ efforts fortified by the wisdom and knowledge of communities in sacrifice zones bearing the brunt of the climate crisis. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Nadia. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me today. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about how our campaign and work, sorry, just getting my slides up, removed renewable energy credits from the HERC incinerator, which is an important part of, yeah, of getting the incinerator shut down. So we'll talk a little bit about the organizing and all the advocacy that helped accomplish that. So one of the ways at which that really happened is one, really understanding, I think, in a campaign why something like that does matter to begin with, right? Why does removing those renewable energy credits, even if that money, which it turned out to be in our case, um, wasn't all that much revenue for the credits, the tax credits for the incinerator, how it still is such a campaign win. And so both symbolically and still a financial serious hit. It was more than, $2 million that they were getting for these tax credits. So talk a little bit about why that mattered, the long-term organizing effort for that, um, to get that accomplished, the key legislators, because a lot of this is really, this presentation is about that advocacy, and then the policy impacts that come out of a win like that, and really more so too within that fight, the learnings and lessons that come out of what happens during this particular avenue within the campaign. So why it mattered, the HERC as many false solutions, this is the case. But with the HERC, it was wrongfully classified as a renewable energy source. This allowed it to receive renewable energy credits, legitimizing the pollution near environmental justice communities, disproportionately harming Black, Brown, and low-income residents. So, when you have renewable energy credits or anything of that nature applied to a facility, a toxic facility, what it is essentially doing is reinforcing that false solution. Something like the renewable energy credits, more specifically, right, is saying that this is renewable energy, much more that in and of itself outweighs the harms. These are all kind of the narratives that come about certain items that come that are applied and then benefited through the facility. And so it really mattered to get this removed because it was one step in showing that actually this incinerator, this facility is a false solution. And so it should not be receiving these credits. As I mentioned, again, I often show this little comic piece in presentations because I think it shows pretty succinctly what's happening here. Now, beyond the renewable energy credits, right, one of the defenses about the incinerator is that it receives, or that the revenue made from it selling the energy to make electricity and heat is that it uses that revenue to be applied to certain initiatives that are good for the climate, right? Like planting trees. It gets put in a fund to allow programs and projects like that. And so again, this is really warping this idea of the incinerator and all the harm it does by putting this veil, right, of the good that it is for the climate. And so with this image, with this graphic, right, we kind of see that in a nutshell. It's saying, well, it makes money. This money allows community to benefit in this small way, when in fact it's poisoning communities, the frontline communities in Minneapolis, but really everyone at large. So part of accomplishing getting these renewable energy credits removed really came down to these steps. It was forming a coalition right through the grassroots efforts of base building, allyship, folks who were really, really invested in environmental justice. I will emphasize and speak to more of that in a second. It will not be unfamiliar to most folks of why I'm emphasizing that, but the other piece, of course, is the community pressure, having communities speaking out about this, having those folks at the table, especially when it comes to matters of legislation and policy. These are typically the folks who are actually unable to be at the table through the inaccessible language or even the physical place itself. And then, of course, organizations stepping up. This is a really important piece too that I'll elaborate on in a second. So as a lot of folks have spoken to already, Oriana and Chloe about the organizing effort, the grassroots efforts of community involvement. Um, won't spend too much time on that because it's really the same situation here, same case here as it is nationally, globally. Um, you got to get the folks on the ground, the communities, the frontline communities impacted, to really have their voices heard and to really be involved, and leading this work. And so us at the environmental justice table, but long before us as well, had been fighting to get this designation removed as far as the incinerator counting as a renewable energy source. So this coalition building and the community demands were already in motion through the HERC campaign. So because of these efforts of community, that the community led before the EJ table and the Zero Burn Coalition, which is our coalition currently campaigning to shut it down, there was community for decades fighting against this, right? And what really happened out of an expansion, they wanted to expand how much waste went go to the incinerator, and there was a community fight that won, and they weren't able to expand. We really sort of worked off of that success and that momentum to create the coalition and build off of that and say, wait a second, this thing shouldn't be here to begin with. Never mind the fact that it's getting these renewable energy credits. So that organizing and that community awareness already kind of set the stage for what was then, or creating the foundation of power for this opportunity to get the renewable energy credits removed. So we built off of that significantly. So that brings us to the renewable energy credits and really how we were able to get that removed. Minnesota in 2000, well, there was 100%, what was called a 100% campaign, a 100% coalition. And it was folks, different organizations, and activists who were trying to get a 100% clean electricity law in Minnesota. They were able to get it passed in 2023. And what that essentially said was that 100% carbon-free electricity would be the case by 2040. At least 55% of electricity would have to be from renewables. So that is what we normally count as, wind and solar. But this is where that language and having actual community and environmental justice rooted organizations involved is really, really important because through the campaign, obviously with good intentions of having carbon-free energy, there was a lot of loose language and loopholes. Um, and so the initial version of the 100% bill had removed incineration, but because language was weakened and loopholes allowed it to actually be re-added. And that was actually due to certain environmental groups who were negotiating because there were a lot of groups involved. So this is again why it is incredibly important to have solidly grounded organizations in environmental justice to be part of this work. Not that environmental justice in a name or in a mission necessarily means you are about environmental justice, as I'm sure many of us know, but understanding how rooted organization is in those frontline communities and those relationships will really be the telling component. So allies, of course, environmental justice allies, communities had relentlessly pressured the 100% campaign and that coalition to strengthen the language and add a provision to remove incineration to receive renewable energy credits. And so we also had folks that had to environmental justice folks had to directly intervene with key legislators to ensure those loopholes were closed. So this is all, in the campaign and in this fight to create this bill that started off with great intentions again and strong language. As this goes with a lot of bill making and policy creating, that interim of having to negotiate language is really important to get involved because if you are not reading between the lines, I mean, reading the language that's there, but also between the lines of what that could allow, you could end up with a bill that just doesn't have any teeth, that actually isn't doing much, especially for frontline communities, but certainly nothing to to tackle the climate crisis, right? And what we're looking for and what we need, especially for frontline communities, is incredibly bold policy. And as environmentalism goes across the country, and as we all have known and understand from our own states, this policy is really can make or break certain the investment and resourcing of infrastructure that would in fact combat the climate crisis. And so with this policy, you know, one thing that felt like a no-brainer was certainly getting these credits removed. It didn't make any sense to be championing environmental justice and yet to allow incineration burning trash to receive renewable energy credits. So some key legislators, and this is another part of campaigns, anybody's campaign, and one thing that we wanted to emphasize through our work and in this presentation is the relationship to to really champion people's champion type legislators and electeds. You know, say what you will about electoral politics in general and participation, but you know, as much as you can, and we could debate whether it can make or break campaigns, it can certainly help. And there's a lot of avenues for that, for it amplifying the work you're doing in your campaign. In our case, especially with getting these renewable energy credits removed, that was certainly the matter. So our main champion here was Representative Frank Hornstein. He really has been anti-incineration, has been part of getting this shut down for decades. He introduced and pushed for this to be part of the bill. And then Representative Patty Acom was also very supportive and pushing. And then, of course, Representative Jamie Long, who is the chair of the DFL, really had the power to do that. But that wasn't, you know, again, this was because of our participation and other environmental justice groups, actual groups pushing them. Not so much Frank, but certainly, you know, Representative Jamie Long, and a lot of powerful negotiators as well, again, who were rooted in environmental justice. So powerful allies made the HERC removal non-negotiable, as I was saying. One of those groups actually there's actually a handful of grassroots organizations um, and activists and communities who were part of the campaign who were negotiating on the inside and for years trying to relentlessly again have that language changed. But one particular ally um, that really helped get this done was Energy Foundation. And that was because of advocacy from years before, who had not necessarily pushed, but brought up and made incineration a serious issue that they then took a national stance on. And that again paved the way then for them to then make this a non-negotiable. And so again, we're really seeing again that grassroots effort, the domino effect, starting with the coalition building, having your base, the grassroots efforts of getting frontline communities involved, building those relationships with solid organizations, powerful players like Energy Foundation, and then having those relationships and serious champions of community in legislation, in legislators. And so this allowed us then a lot of the legislators to finally listen due to years of that persistent grassroots advocacy, and HERC then ultimately losing the renewable energy status under the Clean Energy Bill. And that was through a provision that stated incinerators in an EJ community could no longer be considered renewable energy. So, of course, the policy impacts through this was that it set a precedent. It strengthened the case against false solutions. This is really due to this, you know, as much as the 100% campaign made national news, I believe it made Minnesota one of 11 states that had such a bill. It also meant that within the state itself, accompanying all that media attention was the fact that incineration could no longer receive this. So this was a big narrative win, a big communications win, and this really highlighted false solutions in general. And this also allowed, I think, a lot of activists and organizations to understand what environmental justice actually means, and moving forward, like what we're going to be pushing for, and what will not be negotiable when we are trying to create policies to tackle the climate crisis. It also opens the door for stronger zero waste policies and advancing the path to shutting down the incinerator. So again, as we are removing resources and things for these false solutions, we can then reassign them to actual solutions. So some lessons out of this was relationship building with legislators is key, but pressure is still needed, even on some of those champions at times. Many environmental groups also don't necessarily prioritize environmental justice. So understanding and really discerning who is about environmentalism and who is about environmental justice, being persistent. And policy wins take years of organizing, coalition building, and refusing compromise. And I'll end it with this very quick, few second clip of Representative Frank Hornstein at a meeting speaking on actually this, the renewable energy credits.
They were getting actually financial credits at the county, the same as they would for wind and solar because of HERC. We would never, ever have a victory like that without a movement. Yeah.
So yeah, there's Frank being Frank, speaking to the real people and folks who are creating change. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Krystle, for that awesome presentation. And last but not least, we have Samantha Hernandez. Samantha Hernandez, she, her pronouns, is the Healthy Climate Program Director at Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. Her work focuses on supporting campaigns and coalitions advocating for climate justice and a just transition away from fossil fuels. Samantha graduated from Lewis and Clark College with a bachelor's degree in Hispanic Studies and Environmental Studies. So I will share my screen and turn it over to you, Samantha.
Well, thank you, everyone. My name is Samantha Hernandez, and I am the Healthy Climate Program Director at Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. So today I will be giving you all a brief presentation about organizing for grassroots power, insight, strategies, and lessons learned. And first, I want to give y'all an idea of what I will be going over in this presentation. So first, I'm going to share some context around the local organizing against Covanta, now known as ReWorld, in Oregon. And then I'm going to discuss two insights that were vital in the fight against Covanta, along with some lessons learned. Those two insights being working in collaboration and the importance of the public health voice. And then I'm going to go on to talk about two instrumental strategies in our fight against Covanta, along with some lessons learned as well. Those two strategies being lobbying and community education. And then finally, I'm going to finish off by discussing where we are now. Next slide, please. And so before I dive into my presentation, I would love to learn a little bit about you all. Valentine's Day was last Friday. So if you feel called to and are able to, I would love to know, what is your favorite way to show love or kindness? And so please share your answer in the chat and or unmute again if you feel called to and are able to. Me personally, this was a difficult question for me to answer because there's so many ways. But I think my favorite way to show love is by cooking and baking sweet treats that I know my loved ones really enjoy. I love making stomachs happy. Yeah. Oh, someone else said cooking. Awesome. Yes, I love to cook. Okay, Jessica as well. Awesome. We have a lot of chefs today. Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing. Alrighty, so moving on, I want to give a brief explanation of who is Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. And so we are an organization of health professionals and public health advocates working in collaboration to protect human health, essentially. And we seek a healthy, just, and peaceful world for present and future generations. And so next slide, please. Yes, thank you. And so we work on a wide range of issues that I won't go super in depth in today. Our Healthy Climate program is focused on issues such as dismantling fossil fuel infrastructure, clean energy, clean air, waste incineration, and more. And then our Peace and Justice program, next slide, please, is focused on issues like nuclear disarmament and the health effects of war. And so that is just a little summary of our organization and the work that we do. And so some context around the local organizing against Covanta. With funds from GAIA, thank you, GAIA, the organization was able to hire a stellar clean organizer named Karina. Karina served as OPSR's clean air organizer for 3 years before she transitioned to another role. And Karina, alongside our volunteers, led much of our work against the Covanta Marion County Waste Incinerator. And so I just want to give credit where credit is due. Funny story, actually. I found out that I grew up near a waste incinerator through Karina. She shared a news article in our Slack channel about a waste incinerator that had burned down in Florida. And I actually grew up near that waste incinerator. All my life, I wondered what that smokestack was and why it smelled so horrible. And it turns out that it was a waste incinerator. So anyways, on that note, a little bit of background about Covanta. It's the only waste incinerator in the state of Oregon. The We World Marion facility is the only medical waste incinerator on the West Coast. It has been operating for nearly 4 decades in Brooks, Oregon, which is located in Marion County. And fun fact, I don't know if any of you have ever tasted the fruit Marionberry, but it was named after Marion County, which is where Marionberry was bred and tested in the 1950s. And so it's super delicious if you haven't had a chance to taste it. And so, hence, no surprise, there's a large population of farm workers and Spanish-speaking Latino families living near the incinerator and in Brooks, Oregon. And so next slide, please. This is a picture of the Marion County We World waste incinerator. As you can see, there's like lots of agricultural land surrounding the incinerator. Amazing. And so on to our first insight, which is working in collaboration. We worked in collaboration with various environmental justice organizations and community-based organizations, including Beyond Toxics and PICUN, Pineros y Campesinos Unidos. And we worked in coalition with these organizations to stop Covanta and help pass a bill that I will elaborate on later on. And so our main lesson that was learned was that organizing in coalition is really effective just because everyone plays a different and vital role in the campaign. Super important to develop robust relationships based on trust and a common, understanding, to also move at the speed of trust and work in reciprocity. We found that, this is really integral to movement building. And so one example of this in action was, we worked with PICUN on Covanta. They later reached out to us to support their farm workers' rights bill, which we testified on. And so that is, anyways, one example of us working in reciprocity. And this, sorry, can you go back? I just wanted to explain really quickly that the picture is a picture of a daycare located near the incinerator. And so in 2022, a study funded by Beyond Toxics sampled heavy metals in moss near 3 schools within a 5-mile radius of the incinerator. And the study found the highest levels of barium, cadmium, chromium, lead, and mercury at Brooks Elementary. And so this study did not prove health impacts or even where the heavy metals came from, but it was super helpful in demonstrating that further testing is needed. And so again, coalition is so important. Beyond Toxics is super great at doing these types of studies. And so next slide. And so our next insight from the campaign was realizing the importance of the public health voice. Health professionals are regarded as one of the most trusted voices. And so this was the role of Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, really providing that health expertise. We have found that, you know, people who are progressive or conservative, the health angle is something that they can relate to and get behind. Health professionals carry lots of credibility because of their credentials that legislatures and representatives tend to be open to listening to and from. And so our health professionals provided really amazing testimony that highlighted important public health concerns. For one, medical waste is far more toxic than municipal waste, containing much higher amounts of plastics, polyvinyl chloride, and heavy metals. At ReWorld, cadmium emissions are 10.7 times the federal large new medical waste incinerator limits. Lead emissions are 7.5 times, and mercury emissions are 2.6 times the current federal medical waste incinerator standards. And these heavy metals can cause birth defects, learning disabilities, and other neurological disorders. They also highlighted the fact that incineration of solid waste at Covanta ReWorld creates new compounds like dioxins and furans. These are one of the most toxic chemicals on the planet, other than radioactive isotopes. And so really, really health harming. Our health professionals also brought to light that Covanta Marion slash ReWorld, this waste incinerator is one of the largest medical waste incinerators in the country and was actually operating as a municipal incinerator with much laxer standards for toxic emissions. And so for this reason, Covanta, the argument was made, should be appropriately regulated to limit toxic exposure and protect public health. And so again, the main lesson learned here was that health professional expertise paired with community lived experience is an amazing tool that can uplift and address community health concerns. And so next slide, please. Our main strategy was lobbying to pass SB 488. And this was one of our main campaign wins. SB 488 limits the amount of medical waste to 18,000 tons per year. And it also has two reporting requirements. One is to require that waste incinerators develop a plan to continuously monitor or sample pollutant emissions. So this list includes PCBs, dioxins/furans, cadmium, lead, arsenic, total chromium, magnesium, nickel, selenium, and zinc. And then the second requirement was to report on this progress toward implementing the provisions and also to report on the data. Unfortunately, ReWorld has struggled to meet these reporting requirements. ReWorld twice requested and received extensions for submitting their monitoring and sampling plan to the Department of Environmental Quality. They did not submit a plan until April of 2024. SB 488, as previously stated, requires that ReWorld, implement this monitoring and sampling plan within 3 months of approval from the Department of Environmental Quality. Their plan was approved in June, and in July, ReWorld submitted a petition for reconsideration, saying that it could not comply with the provisions of the approval letter. And unfortunately, according to the most recent DEQ report, because monitoring has not yet begun, the agency currently has no data or findings. And so I think that the lessons learned from this effort was that One, it's really important to dedicate capacity towards lobbying, to educate, address misinformation, and form relationships with legislators. Karina told me that she had to do quite a bit of work to correct lies that were being spread by Covanta lobbyists around what the bill entailed, what it did, and its financial impacts. Um, Also, we have found that meeting with legislators really allows you to build that's, social capital and repertoire. And then I think that moving forward, it's in organizing, it's important to develop a plan post-campaign win to keep these companies accountable. There hasn't been, unfortunately, as much capacity to follow Covanta's compliance, ReWorld's compliance with SB 488. It's just been a little bit difficult with competing campaigns. Um, and so, yes, moving forward, I think we would want to, anyways, develop some sort of plan to make sure that they are being held accountable. And so next slide, please. And so our second strategy that I think worked really well was community education. And so our former Clean Air organizer, Karina, and our former Healthy Climate Program Director, David, did some bilingual door knocking in a local neighborhood located near the waste incinerator. That's a picture of them while they were door knocking. And this proved to be really fruitful because they realized that visiting this neighborhood, the waste incinerator was actually close to a number of homes, businesses, schools, and a child daycare. Y'all saw a picture of that child daycare earlier. And upon further research online on the Census Bureau, they discovered that Brooks is a small community of around 500 people. 47% are Latino, and around 41% are Spanish speaking. And again, many are agricultural workers. They talked to families who had lived there for years, including some people in their network with underlying health conditions such as asthma. And through this door knocking, there was they found that there was genuine interest from community members that they spoke to in finding out more about air quality and the health impacts of incineration. And this door knocking was also done to inform folks of the bill that was being introduced, and was also served as a way to educate community members about the bill and how they can support and how to get involved. And there was a lot of support and interest shown by community members. And so I think the main lesson learned was, go where the community is, meet them where they're at, connect with people, and provide them with, accessible information, like other folks have expressed already, in the language they speak. And so next slide, please. And so where are we now? I'm sure some of you may have heard that WeWorld announced it will be shutting down the Marion County WeWorld waste incineration facility in Oregon by December 31st, 2024. But Covanta slash WeWorld has been up to no good, and their lobbyists are working really hard. They managed to convince the Marion County commissioners to extend their contract for another 6 months. And so now they have until June 30th of 2025 to operate. And there is a discussion about the county possibly buying the incinerator to continue the waste incineration operations, although we don't know how this seems possible, considering that the county would not have enough financial means to do so. There was also a bill this session, essentially reversing SB 488. And so right now we are working in coalition to try and stop this bill. and work with legislators to educate them about waste incineration and its harmful effects. And so next slide, please. Yeah, and so that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for that wonderful presentation. And now we'll turn it over to the panelists for some questions. We have some time for questions. If you didn't get a chance, please add your questions using the Q&A feature and submit your questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. But we can get started with, we have one question. What role has grassroots organizing played in your work to shut down incinerators? And how has organizing community members made a difference in your campaigns? I think we heard a little bit from all of the panelists about this, but wondering if maybe Chloe might want to answer this one, or Oriana.
I'm sorry, I thought it was going to be visual for me to see the question, so I didn't hear it completely. What could you say it one more time?
No worries. So what role has grassroots organizing played in your work to shut down incinerators, and how has organizing community members made a difference in your campaigns?
Oh, yeah. So it's definitely imperative because the people that we're organizing for are the community members, making sure that they are at the forefront of decision making, at the forefront of strategy and resource building. And then on top of that, a good example would be with our current fight with Passaic Valley Sewage Commission proposing to put another power plant into our community. We've been able to send out almost 1,000 letters to the Board of Commissioners, and that has definitely played a role in the impact of how this campaign has gone, making sure that the public pressure is placed on them and being aware that people are watching.
That's great. I mean, I don't know if anyone else on this panel had anything to add to that. Okay, well, then we'll move on to another question. I think we heard a little bit about organizing community members, and Chloe, you just touched on that um, so greatly. And I'm wondering, how can community members harness that collective power to drive meaningful change, especially when facing powerful opposition like the incinerator industry? We heard from Samantha on how you know, the work that they've been doing organizing, they were able to shut down the incinerator, but now we're finding out that there's an extension for another 6 months. Yeah, so I'm wondering, how can you use that collective power to fight this opposition? Um, Maybe Krystle can touch on this one.
Maria, I'm so sorry. I was trying to figure out, my screen was just pinned on Samantha. Samantha was taking up like my whole screen, so I had technical difficulties. I figured it out, but can you repeat the question one more time? I'm so sorry.
No worries. I just removed I think it was spotlighted, but I was asking, how can communities harness their collective power to drive meaningful change, especially when facing powerful opposition like the incinerator industry?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it really is a power in numbers thing. I think, that coalition building is really important. We obviously have moments where there's a collective sort of reaction, to injustices that we see all the time. And that's powerful. But as far as the organizing goes, I think community really needs to, or what's most helpful in these campaigns and these kinds of fights is being really organized. And so, really gaining that collective power, meeting together, yeah, doing that grassroots work of door knocking, informing the public as much as possible, getting as many folks as you can, figuring out, different people's capacities and talents and how to best utilize that, but really being in good coordination, communication with each other. And yeah, and unfortunately, I think I've just been hearing a lot of this past week with a lot of different movement and work, but it definitely entails a certain kind of, yeah, dedication, right? We're all living in a world where everyone is pretty over capacity. I think everyone can probably, explain that, what's going on in their lives that puts them at those limits. But yeah, we're unfortunately in a time where we're all going to have to push a little bit beyond that. So what does that look like? But really navigating, yeah, getting together and organizing. So.
Great. I don't know if Oriana, maybe you might want to touch on the last question a little bit.
Yeah, I think okay, can you say the full question just one more time?
Yeah, so the question was, how can communities harness their collective power to drive meaningful change, especially when they're facing opposition from the incinerator industry and other powerful forces that be?
Yeah, I think kind of going back to the visioning piece of it all, and kind of like what Krystle was saying about needing to see like where we're able to push the boundaries. I think that collaborative visioning is really helpful for that and understanding, one, what are the needs of the community members? How do they want to see solutions brought about? Definitely don't want to impose anything on folks, but really understanding how everyone can come together, what's their vision, what's their role. And I think when you can empower each community member to understand their role in the movement, it definitely makes people a little bit more invested in thinking about how to reach that solution, knowing that we are going up against, big industries, lots of money, deep pockets. I think if everyone can understand, kind of what their contribution is, big, medium, small, doesn't have to be too much, but however they're able to contribute to the fight, I think is really helpful, because if we can pull more people in to the movement, I think, that's where our power is at. But making sure that it's accessible for folks, that everyone has, a role to play, and that they're valued in it, I think is really helpful in making sure that we can push back against these big industries.
Thank you for that. And I can close it out with Samantha. I wonder if you had some thoughts. I know you're currently, you shared with us where things are now with the Oregon Reworld incinerator. I know you also shared that capacity is an issue, but wondering like how else can you fight the incinerator industry and the other lobbying powers that are happening in the background?
Yeah, I think what other folks have already mentioned, like Chloe, Oriana, and Krystle, is we are now meeting again weekly and touching base and reaching out to legislators to make sure that we can put out this fire in terms of the bill and make sure it hopefully doesn't even get a hearing. And then as for the extension of their operations, first we're gonna put out this fire and then deal with the second fire. And so I think, taking things one at a time is important in organizing and not overburdening folks, especially in these times with so many different competing um fights. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I would be interested in hearing what advice do you have for community organizers who are just starting out to organize against incineration or other waste facilities? You've all shared some awesome lessons learned, but I'm wondering what advice would you share to those just starting out?
I'm happy to start off. The first thing that I would recommend is knowing how to stay grounded. Being able to balance between, caring for yourself and simultaneously caring for community. I think one of the things that really overwhelmed me in the beginning, was like this existential crisis of like, how am I going to combat all of these things? When, placing the burden on us is exactly what capitalism wants. Like, it's not an individual responsibility as much as it is corporations' responsibility, and our push to resist. So that's the first thing I would say. And then after that, like, just try to make sure that you can stay informed and find new ways and creative ways to inform other people. Yeah, that's my spiel.
Awesome. What about Krystle?
Yeah, I think, a really important, I was kind of, oh, I didn't actually send. I was responding to a question, but I think kind of along those lines, um, of starting out and yeah, how to best, oh, there's no really best way to go about it, but I do think that foundation of like-mindedness with people in groups is really important to establish first and ground in. They're out there. There's so many great organizations and people, activists, community leaders, elders. But you've got to get those relationships going. You have to build those relationships, acquire that trust. I think this is where we always hear this on the left, right? And a lot of our work is knowing your community. That's really important. And it's also very difficult when we're living in a society and country that is, you know, pushing you into the most individualized nature and way and siloed way of being, especially when we're all just, a lot of folks are just trying to survive. How much can people really be tapped into the collective and community? But that's really the only way we're going to win this. So it is a matter of kind of getting out there and figuring out who these people are that are most aligned with you. Um, I'm not part of, DSA, but groups like DSA and other kinds of groups, right? They will show up. They're reliable. So there's lots of organizations. I just name them because they are great allies and they do show up to a lot of our work. But there's, more local groups, folks who aren't national or local chapters, but I think really tapping into folks who are aligned and building with them is a great starting point. So just reaching out.
No, that's
Yeah,
great advice. Oh, go ahead, Samantha.
if I could add to what Krystle just said, I've had similar experiences with some mm, different organizations who maybe approach things differently than community members would approach, wanting to support and get involved. And what I have found is, again, what has already been said is finding a common goal and then just delegating roles and communicating those clearly, and yeah, communicating how they can be of service and where they're most needed. I've found has been, anyways, super helpful. And I think on that note, I think my advice would also just get to know people, like get coffee with folks in the movement, get to know them one-on-one. That has been really helpful for me when entering new spaces and new campaigns that I'm not familiar with. They give me the down low of, the group dynamics, the group conflicts, where there is an alignment and there needs to be some work done to find some alignment. These spaces aren't perfect, but anyways, yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, I think plus one to all of that. I think definitely like figuring out, how to just stay grounded, especially in times like this where there's so many fires right now that call our attention. I think the networking piece is huge. Like, again, just knowing in these times, especially, like, you have a big community around you, both like the actual community that you're working with, that you live in, you know, your friends, families, your immediate sphere, but then also like all the other organizers that are also, you know, in the grind. And I think also just knowing like it's okay to rest. Like rest in and of itself is resistance. And so knowing like it's okay sometimes to, you know, recoup. We can't do all the things, but that's why, like Samantha was saying, it's important to delegate, you know, where you can, but also like not feeling bad if you need to take a day to just, you know, gather yourself and come back stronger, you know, the next day. So yeah, I think just grounding, networking, rest where you can.
Great, that's awesome. So we have a question from the chat. How do you unite the community and organizations in a common solution when there are differing opinions or ideas about how to fight the incinerator industry and other EJ issues? I think Samantha kind of touched on this, maybe delegating, and I think there was a presentation that I think Krystle mentioned there's a difference between environmentalism and environmental justice, and then or somebody did, and just differentiating the two. So yeah, how do you work with these dissenting opinions on how to handle, you know, the organizing and this issue?
I would just because I think, yeah, this would obviously pretty relevant to what happened for us with the renewable energy credits, but I think happens in a lot of our environmental justice movements, period, is yeah, I mean, it is both intentional and through negligence or just not having the same principles as a lot of us in this work, environmental justice work. Yeah, these groups will just kind of carry out the status quo, right? And think that in that work, they are, yeah, so less, I think, so about the intentionality there. I think really discerning and working around that is again, you know, sorry, like a broken record here, but it is really important. I think for yourself too, right? I think we see this a lot with electeds. People can be a champion of the people when they're first running, right? Someone who's working class, low income, from, you know, from the real, and then they're in there and they get co-opted, right, in the system. And this, I think, happens with nonprofits too. Um, a lot of nonprofits and a lot of groups. And so I think that's where it is really, really important to for yourself to really know your principles and your what you're grounded in your work, to really be solidified in that. And then also, and so then from there, being able to reach out to a lot of that like-mindedness, and those similar groups and people, because when you have that power of those numbers and groups, this is kind of what happened with Energy Foundation. They were getting nagged by allies and environmental justice groups to take a stance and be part, you know, to really to be a champion on incineration, and that's what happened. So it's pressure and having those folks actually receive and respond to those asks and those demands, and you kind of see a domino effect with that. But you certainly need to build your power and have those allies so that when you are against those dissenting groups, they look pretty bad. You know, they look like they're on the wrong side and part of the opposition, especially with something like with climate change, right? We are looking for bold action, and these sort of, you know, incremental small changes or policies that they're trying to do is absolutely not touching what we're experiencing with the climate change. And so I think it's also good to have some experts on your side as well. That's one thing I don't know about folks here, but that has really helped us is having excellent scientists and lawyers, because a lot of the times the opposition will weaponize science and not, you know, and expertise against the community. So it is also very helpful. You don't necessarily need it, but to have those folks on your side too, so they can't, you know, use that you are just a reactionary or what have you. So.
That was great. And we're coming close on time. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add anything, or I think Krystle kind of nailed it. Okay. So we have 3 minutes left. I just I'm going to take a moment to just close this out really quick. But before we close, I do want to take a moment to recognize the incredible work of our panelists and the Failing Incinerators Project Cohort. This project isn't about just shutting down incinerators. It's also about building power, advancing environmental justice, and proving that communities can create real change. As GAIA celebrates our 25 years, we remain committed to this fight for as long as it takes until every community can breathe clean air, live free from pollution, and have the resources to build a just zero waste future. Stay connected, sign up for our newsletter, join our network, and keep organizing. You'll find all the links in a follow-up email. And thank you for being a part of this fight. We'll see you at the next webinar of this series, Creating Community Zero Waste Plans, where FIP cohort members and allies will share how their communities are pushing toward the implementation of zero waste plans after their incinerator shutdowns. Thank you. Bye.